ocean's whisper calls my name. Depth and longing in my soul, seeking more than just this game. Waves crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Echoes in my heart so deep, eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whisper longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Desire, burning with the holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore.
Okay, I gotta unmute there. Here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to When Deep Calls Deep, where we journey to dwell deeper with Yahweh and with God every day in our journey. I want to welcome Josh Davidson, his brave soul, who has come today. We're going to talk about how to agree. How do we get along? So, Josh, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where we can find you, and then we'll get this going.
Well, I thank you, first of all. Thank you for your time and for your invite. And thank you also for your hard work and dedication as one of our helps for Faith Unaltered live chat and moderation and stuff like that. And I'm really appreciative of you. Ever since I've learned that you were doing anything for us, I was like, wow, that she's doing way more than I expected anybody to like show up for. This is really remarkable. And so like, just in general, you've been a pretty solid blessing. So I thank you for that. But my channel is the Faith Unaltered channel on YouTube. We have also uploads on podcast websites and stuff, but most of our content is available primarily on YouTube. And then my own segment on the Cosmic Corner is hosted on the Faith Unaltered channel as well. So all of my content pretty much is available on Faith Unaltered. And if somebody is interested in a wide variety of views and a wide variety of forms and methods of apologetics, and a lot of different, let's say, exploration of the different facets of Christianity, whether those are ones that we agree with or not, we've gone about trying to make a case for getting people to talk to one another so that we don't fragment any further than we need to. So we want to come to clarity, but do it with charity for one another. And so that's kind of the mission statement of Faith Unaltered. So the fact that you invited me on for this, I feel like kind of lends itself to that, because that's something that I am deeply passionate about in general, is actually learning to find people where they are and try not to make my first mode of interaction with them something where I am here and I need to tell them about themselves. Right. So there's a lot to exploring division and how that's taking place, and unity and how that takes place, and then the differences between one another without having to be either rightness or wrongness.
Right. So, which is one of the things that I really has grown for a heart for what I want to do here on my channel, and using my personality, which tends to have the superpower of optimism to almost the point where people think it's a little bit of naivete, but optimism is one of my superpowers. And so I don't think we're hopelessly divided. And I think by having more of these kinds of good conversations that maybe we can start to find some more good common ground. And I want to put this up here and shout this out. Nick Quint put up a video today talking about the American Baptist and some of his thoughts. So go check that out. It was excellent. Nick is very thoughtful and has a very big heart for the body of Christ and the American Baptist in the first, so go check that out when you're done here, because Nick did a great job. And so all right. And thanks, Troy. Appreciate that. So I want to kind of talk a little bit just really quickly about where this idea and this video came from. So I spent, like Josh said, I do some modding for Faith Unaltered, and I did quite a bit of time modding for a channel some of you might have heard of called Idol Killer, and did some modding on a few other channels as well. I ended up, I think, when I retired from most of my modding, I gave back, I think, 8 wrenches, because I don't know how I ended up with so many. People just kept giving them to me everywhere I went. So I gave most all of them back. But, and those were pretty much all in the soteriology realm. And so I spent the last year plus modding in that arena, and I was watching and getting to know everybody and learning and following the conversation for probably 3, I think, years. And so, and it got to the point where I think moderating that when Baal Gate struck, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with that whole controversy, and when that whole thing broke loose, that was, I think, the turning point for me, where this idea started kind of percolating in my head for today's conversation, because I started really seeing some things that I really just made me sick. It really honestly just made me sick. And then more and more after that, it seemed to just kind of go steadily, slowly, incrementally downhill from there. And I think for me, just watching that conversation stall, so I grew up in small farm town part of the world, and lots of farms and cattle ranchers, and this is back a while. But one of the things that we used to have to help do, being the preacher's kid, you get to volunteered to go help a lot of things, and get volunteered to be a lot of free labor, and we helped pull a lot of trucks out of ditches, and we're just watching them spinning wheels in the mud. It reminded me of a lot of what I was seeing in modding for Idol Killer and some of these channels, that the soteriology argument is kind of stalled. So it just doesn't seem like to me that it's moving in either direction very well. And I would say the same thing, as I have completely given up and abandoned ship on eschatology. I know people give me a hard time because I've had people ask me, like, what are my views on eschatology? And I avoid that like the plague, and for a lot of the same reason. So, but let's jump into this, because that's kind of where this came from, and watching the fighting and the controversy and the being dug in and entrenched on either side. And I'm guessing that you guys have seen quite a bit of that over at Cosmic Corner and Faith Unaltered, that your journey over there has been pretty interesting. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that real quick.
Oh, man. Well, okay. So here's the thing. I've been podcasting with Tyler since 2019.
Yeah.
I've known Tyler since roughly 2017-ish, probably. And that was when he had very recently become a very serious Christian and started to become very studious. He discovered some of the favorite hero teachers of the Reformed ranks and what just fell head over heels in love with the satisfied power and certainty of an internally consistent system, had never encountered that before ever, and was like, wow, look at the explanatory, I'm just so in love. And he fell in love with systematic theology. And that was at a time where he was very, let's say, impressionable because he was so passionate, and he became what they call a cage stager, Calvinist kind of guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was very recently after I had come out of Calvinism and was in whatever you would call the corresponding non-Calvinist cage stage era. And so when we connected with one another, we were those horrendous but hilarious opposites. And so the fact that we've meshed over time and had the chemistry that we did, I think is proof of the fact that these conversations are worth their weight in gold if you are willing to treat the person that you're talking to more important than your ability to succeed in establishing your own correctness. You can play the long game with somebody and see the fruit out of that, because Tyler is not only not a Calvinist right now, he's gone to a completely other extreme where he's gone so explorative, where he actually became Eastern Orthodox, and he's not on the catechumen anymore either. He's an actual member, baptized and taking communion in the Orthodox Church. And even 3 years ago, that would have been like unthinkably hilarious. Like to say, oh, Tyler's going to be Eastern Orthodox. That's hilarious to me. Just getting him to think outside that same box has been like, and it's been eye-opening for me also. And so there's a lot to this. There's a lot to this, because soteriology was the root of that controversy for me also.
Yeah. And I just know, like, there's a couple instances that stick out in my mind that get us to start where we're going to start with this whole combativeness and contention argument. And, you know, and like I mentioned before, there's the whole Baal gate thing. And I saw, normally when I mod, I try not to kick people out. It's my last thing that I like to do. I would much rather talk to somebody and try to, you know, bring them around and get them to at least tone down the rhetoric a little bit so we can keep them in there. Because if you can get them to stay in and maybe listen a little bit more, you know, that might make some progress to cracking open some minds just a little bit. But I was seeing there was just more and more people, especially after Ballgate, that I was just having to kick. And we ended up, I think it was, I was getting on a streak of kicking at least a person a live stream, which is unheard of for me and my tolerance for people. And so that, and I remember one in particular that really soured me in this whole thing was it was a co-stream that Idol Killer did with another podcast, and they you know, and Warren is a very generous guy, and so he was like, hey, everybody go from my channel, go over and sub this guy's channel. Let's help build his numbers a little bit, get him a little bit more visibility. And we had probably 20 people open another tab, jump over there and subscribe. And I think 17 to 18 of them came right back and started just blasting both Warren and the other guy because of the guy's view on some things. And I think I could see, you know, Roddy K is one of the mods here. He's one of my buddies, and we kicked probably 3 or 4 of them because they were so hateful about the other guy's view on something in particular that it just really just made me sick. And so, you know, and I'm talking about, like, with this combativeness, contentionness, you know, I see a lot when I was modding, especially in soteriology. You know, it is the automatic, you disagree with me, so you're a heretic and you're not a Christian. And that really, really gets under my skin so quickly because it's just so dismissive. And I started having, like, Tyler has been on my channel I had the guy that was involved in that other incident, had him on my channel. I've had a guy from Church of Christ on my channel. We talked about the Reformation movement, and all of those conversations have been, let's start with where we agree. We didn't even go to where we disagree. There's more than enough of you can find where people disagree, but finding where we agree, it has been so refreshing and life-giving. And I've discovered there's so much more that we have to agree about than we have to disagree about, but we focus on where we disagree. And that's where it feeds this combativeness and adds to this contention, because we're so busy trying to prove the other guy wrong and forcing them to agree with 100% of what's in my head, that I think we are definitely getting into error. And a lot of us will have things to account for when we have at some day to give account for the words that we have said to each other as believers. So I don't know, that was kind of a long there. What do you want to jump in on that one there, Josh, and kind of give your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, a couple of things. I've become known on Cosmic Corner and other places for having ways of condensing things into a thought that can be used and managed, small pieces.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing from what you're describing and from my own experience is when people start to approach theology and apologetics in a way that allows for their correctness to be their confidence, it starts to feed their ego. And that means that agreement and unity has become far too weak a stimulant. And so they stop chasing the good. They start chasing correctness, which again is an ego feed as much as it is anything else. But it's disguised as personal piety to say, I love the Lord and I want to defend him. I want to speak the truth. I'll speak the truth in love, however they think that manifests in the moment. Usually that's not what it means. Usually what they do is they use that as a shield to be able to say what they want and say the truth is loving, as though those two things are the same. You can tell the truth to somebody by being terribly unloving. You know what I mean? Especially if you're doing it in antagonism. And so I think a lot of what it is that you're talking about is the way that this all kind of comes together in terms of an arena where people are intentionally coming together for the purpose of being combative. Mm-hmm. And so we have an arena online, which normally, let's say 30 years ago, you would have done it perhaps in a den at your best mate's house, or at the bar, or in some sort of collegiate room around a table, and there would be the same rite and ritual of earning your keep and becoming the person that can get the regard and respect of the people that are around you, and then your opinion will be heard. That's no longer necessary. Anybody's opinion can be heard because they just need to make the most noise, right? And it's because of the arena that we've afforded ourselves online that takes away what it is that you and I are doing right now, even our faces. If you take that away, and there's nothing more than just the words on the screen and the little mini round symbol that imagine your person. Yeah, the lion. That's great. Thank you. That's cute. Bring back pub discussions. Exactly. Like meeting people face to face and getting the respect and regard and learning to earn someone's ear before you demand that they simply comply and listen to you. A lot of the time, like there used to be such platitudes that people kind of relied on because it was common knowledge that respect is earned and things like that. And nowadays it's very weird because you have this disconnect. You have this world in which we've come to think that like the internet world is just as real, if not more real, than the places that I go and I interact with in everyday life, right? And so we try to behave as though it is more real than it is out in real life, right? And so that's why I think oftentimes it hits us so bad when somebody starts to act in a way that they would literally never act that way in real life. You're appalled at them, as you should be, that they're acting this way only because they're afforded the arena to act in a way that would never be acceptable otherwise. You know what I mean? So it's like that. Yeah. I think that's one of the main things that Christians have taken up that gauntlet and made that their stomping grounds, because they think that cynical, angry mindset gives them some sort of power because they're unbothered. And being
Mhm.
unbothered is not the same thing as being Christian by any stretch.
Mhm. No, and one of the other things that I see that just makes me cringe, and I've seen some of the behind the scenes because I've been on some of these guys, Patreon and some of their Discord things and some of that kind of thing. And the the back and forth of the dehumanizing through the meme war has really gotten
Mhm.
out of control. And I just there is a point where memes can be used effectively to make a point and to make people laugh and to bring some attention to something that needs attention. But when it is actively plotted and planned in humiliation and in firing back in ways that um, are just wrong and just in, intended to bring a vitriolic response, intended to stir up a hateful response and to dig people in even further. It really just it just makes me just sickened to the core. And it just I do wish that we had a way and a rule that before you could do that kind of thing, you had to at least sit down camera on to camera on and have a conversation first before because of the way that this works, not everyone can sit down face to face, but at least talk to them face to face on camera to camera, because these are people that we're talking about. These are individuals who have thoughts and opinions and emotions, but we're all image bearers of God. And I go back to being an Old Testament nerd and an Old Testament major. I tend to go to the Old Testament first. A lot of people, who are not me, go to the New Testament first, like our friend Mr. Nick Quint down there, the New Testament guy. um, that but I go to the Old Testament, and Dr. Carmen Imes wrote this fantastic book, and there's actually two of them now, but on what it means actually to be an image bearer of God. And I think that a lot of this combativeness and contention is dishonoring and not bearing God's name well amongst Christians. And so I really think that we need to take a deep breath and get back to conversations where we are talking about first, put pause on where we disagree and let's get back to where we agree. Let's bring some positivity, let's bring some oxygen into these conversations, because I think this negativity and this fighting has sucked all the air out of the room. And I think a lot of us are starving to death spiritually because we have removed the spirit out of the room and out of the conversations. And it really just, this is one of those things I don't get worked up about a lot, but these are one of these conversations that I do get worked up about because, I one day I remember I said something in, I think it was a Trinity Radio live stream, and I said something about that I disagreed with their position, and but I had I had a hard time with what they were trying to say because their view was dependent on how they thought that the rapture was going to happen. And
Mm.
they immediately responded, well, do you believe in the rapture or not? And I'm like, well, you know what? No, I don't. I'm not holding to a view that that has a rapture involved in it. And it was just ugly, the attack that I got back, that I was a heretic, that I should this is why women are too stupid to understand theology. I should go find a husband and have him explain proper
Mm.
theology to me, that I couldn't read the Bible by myself if I didn't believe in a rapture. And I was absolutely, and that kind of thing happens to me on a regular basis, especially in these theology conversations. Being female and having an opinion for some reason causes a lot of males to have an allergic reaction and get really tough on me. And and I've had to learn to really not take it personally, and to view it for what it is. But it is very tough. The theology conversations should not feel like combat, and it should not feel like being completely disregarded as less than human in having an opinion that's different than someone else's. And so I just, this is one of those things that theology should be. We can disagree, but it should be life-giving at the same time, and not poisoning people's souls in the combat of trying to be right, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also stems from the fact that some of the favored, more popular hero teachers that are more scholastically oriented happen to be people that lend themselves to an attitude that breeds this whole like heresy hunting thing that people are doing in online. And that's kind of their whole shtick, is getting people to look at certain worldviews and like poke holes and mock one another and things like that. And it's like that is that's their lane. That's what they want to do. You know what I mean? Like that's the aesthetic that they want to build. And so the only problem that I have with that is that they won't stay in their lane.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's like, if you want to do that, and that's going to be like your, sports bar, high-fiving each other into the sunset thing that you do with you and your homies, that's fine. But then when you start to tout that around as this is the solid biblical teaching, no, it's not. That's you pounding your chest, and you can do that. Feel free. Just don't get mad at me that I'm not. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people that probably don't like me or the things that I say. Still, they're a lot less vocal now, just because I've kind of found a lane and stayed in it. I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy having conversations like this, and why I do Cosmic Corner in general. Cosmic Corner to me is a miracle. Like I've been doing that for over a year now, almost a year and a half. And I haven't yet had one episode devolve into anything that remotely resembles a debate. And I haven't had one episode where everybody was the same denomination. And we've been talking about some of the deepest things that I can think of. And never has it just like broken down into these. It's never an attitude parade. It's never become like just a pissing contest or anything. You know what I mean? Like it's always very thoughtful. It's always very deep. And but it's mostly because I'm very particular about the kind of people that I'm willing to engage with on that level, right? Yeah. I think this is where that pearls before swine attitude needs to be able to rear its head, is not so that I can call the other person a pig. It's so that I can call myself to account in not spending my time where the investment is not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that it reminds me of something that I saw. Dr. David Allen, he cracks me up. If you follow his Twitter feed, he quips a lot of things that I find hilarious. I don't agree with everything he says, shocks, but about a month or so ago, he posted a thing that said, the more that I read about Job's three friends, the more I have come to view them as something like discernment bloggers. They feel the necessity to point out to him what he himself is blind to see, all the while hypocritically and blissfully unaware it is they who are walking in darkness. And I just laughed so hard when I first saw him post that. And then the more I've thought about it, because I love the book of Job. I love and I think that we have misunderstood the story that Job is trying to tell. And so that makes it even funnier to me that he said that, because I agree with him the longer that I think about it, that is a lot what discernment ministries have devolved into, is this whole thing that looks like a lot of, because Job's friends were brilliant until they started talking, and then it went downhill from there. And I think they are a perfect example, and in discernment ministries are a perfect example of, we need to spend a lot more time listening first to get to what someone is trying to say, because like I sometimes, words are hard, and expressing yourself is hard. And sometimes because I tend to be a visual thinker and a verbal processor. And so sometimes the journey from things, trying to find words from my brain out of my mouth, can be um, a very, very difficult process that I can get things get all turned around and twisted. And sometimes, there are things in my head that I love this. There's this old show called Numbers that was a math genius and his FBI brother learning how to work together. But he has this quote where he says, I sometimes there are no words, or I can't find the words. Some things are so purely what they are in my head that there's just no way I can express them. And I think that with faith, that is such a huge component, that sometimes there is those experiences that we have with God, those encounters with the Holy Spirit, the things that God is teaching us sometimes are inexpressible, and trying to express the inexpressible, we have to grapple for what we have. And for a lot of us, it is human theology that is flawed somewhere. And instead of seeing the message and the beauty of what I'm trying to say, you grab onto the mistake of the human theology that I am borrowing to express the inexpressible. And I think we need to have a lot more listening and a lot more grace, trying to get at what are you actually trying to say, in your lack of being able to express that thing that's in your head or in your heart that doesn't have words necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I think that if people were to extend their concern to the other person enough to listen and really hear what it is that their heart is saying, because as Christ said, it's from the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. If you can begin to listen to someone and really hear their heart on a matter, then you can really be a useful response to that person. But if you are not in that place with that person, your opinion likely won't, first of all, it won't land anywhere. And second, you probably won't have the context to make it land anywhere. Right? Yep. Those two things missing make it it's just a waste of time and attention and energy. Right. And so when you get to a place where you feel like you're trying to explain something to someone, and it's not just that, let's say, the problem that I'm seeing here is that when you go to address this to someone and you don't think that this person is of a mindset, not that they're not intelligent, just that they're not of a mindset to be able to hear what it is that you're saying.
Right.
And then you start to try to dance around what you're saying and censor it so that it can become acceptable to this person. And by that point, your entire thought has died a death of 1,000 qualifiers, and you don't really have anything left worth saying. And then that person just doesn't take it seriously. Right. And so it's like, either I ruffle the feathers and say it bluntly, or I don't have anything worth saying because I'm not sure how to express it. And I don't think that it's necessarily the case that when you're in those situations, it's because either I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. Sometimes it's because what we're trying to explain simply isn't an articulable proposition sort of thing, where I'm trying to take a list of things that I can just show you so that you can go, oh yeah, I agree with this list of things that you laid out. Sometimes, like you said, it's an experience of something and you're trying to work through the experience of something. And when somebody says, I'm depressed, I'm grieving, the other person says, what does that mean? And what you do then is you tell them either a story or you describe your physical sensations. What you're not going to give them is a list of things to affirm. Right. And so, like, if you start trying to nitpick the way that somebody is articulating themselves, especially when they're in a situation where they're really thinking and they're being vulnerable, if you shut that person down with anything like mockery or gaslighting or condescension, good luck ever getting that person to open up again in any serious way. And so I think that's one of the failures of the apologetic scene when it does that sort of thing, is that it's actually shutting the door to having the long form conversation that could bring about a transformation in somebody. What they're doing instead is being far more concerned with how the script gets played out in front of them. because they're expecting their questions to go in a certain order. They're expecting a certain kind of feedback. They're expecting a certain kind of answer, that they got a gotcha question, or I have a quick ready-made answer for that thing. And it's like, a lot of people have been raised up to be these, microwave dinner versions of thinkers that give you these ready-made answers, and they think that makes them right, and it doesn't make them right.
Yeah, you get into prescriptive arguments where everything is a canned response, and it almost turns into this terrible. I don't want to disrespect the word by going there, but it turns into this, canned conversation where if you break outside of my canned conversation, I don't know what to do with you. So automatically you're wrong and you're a heretic and I have to throw you out, and you're not a believer because you don't follow the script in my head. And that's not how that conversation is supposed to go. So you're throwing me off. I don't know what to say. So rather than ask for clarification and talk about it, it's like I just had a conversation last night with someone, and it was going fairly well, but it was a conversation that was a pretty touchy, controversial topic. And we got to a point where there was some disagreement. And I said something in response to a question, and they stopped and asked me, do you mean X term? Are you using X term for this? And I said, well, yes. And that brought down a very hurtful response. But in walking away, sleeping on it, and coming back and thinking about it in my head today, it's because he was using one version of that part of the conversation, and I was coming from a completely different point of view of that conversation, and there was a confusion of terminology. And had we had better terminology of that going in, the whole thing could have been avoided, and there could have been the avoidance of hurt feelings and injury there. That there has to be some restoration and repair work done because of that, I think. But I think that, as we start to talk to people, clarifying how we're using language and what do you mean by that, and by asking that in a way that is actually from a point of pure curiosity without an agenda behind the question, is so important. Because then I feel, if someone, if you were to ask me that, Josh, in a way that I actually think that you want to know what I think and about that, I'm going to be a lot more receptive to actually honestly answering your question, and not giving you my canned instant response that's going to further entrench and gridlock the conversation, because we're just not speaking the same language at all.
And that's definitely a big problem in the
Mhm.
let's say theology world, is utilizing the same vocabulary but meaning very different things by it. Especially because there is that diversity of thought among the different people that are trying to have these conversations. Unfortunately for us, mere repetition usually wins the day, because people aren't aiming at clarity, because they implicitly know, or at least feel, the fragileness of their ideas.
Yeah.
And because they're willing to stake their entire identity and behavioral pattern on how correct they feel they are, they don't want to engage with how fragile their ideas are. And so they'll use their ideas like a club, you know what I mean? Rather than like a tool to build a bridge to go from one person to the other, to really freely exchange ideas. That's far too costly.
Yep.
And this is how cults work, by the way. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be just Christians. This is how cults work. I'm going to put a barrier between you and asking the right questions. And if I can make that barrier successful enough, you won't even want the rest of the questions. You'll be so satisfied in your certainty that you'll close that door, and all of the screams on the outside telling you to come outside will sound more like a threat, and you won't respond to them with anything like curiosity, right? you're not going to respond with curiosity. You're going to respond with flight or fight, right? Those are the things that you're going to. And so the person who knows that their ideas are fragile, just like the guy who has a glass jaw and a loud mouth, as soon as it comes to it, he's going to run away.
Yeah. And I think that that made me think about a conversation that I've been having with another friend about how, I'm working on a video or two that we're going to talk about the theology of being wrong, but about the theology of me being wrong, not the theology of you being wrong. And how do I embrace wrongness? And I think that so many people have this unconscious fear in their head that if I'm wrong about one point of my theology, that it is somehow a house of cards and the whole thing is going to come crashing down. And that is to me, I think, a problem, especially in the evangelical world. We are so theologically stupid that that flimsy theology, the Bible can definitely withstand your being wrong about your theology. God is definitely bigger than that. And, but there's this fear if I'm wrong about whatever, like this is where eschatology shines in this. If I'm wrong about the rapture, my whole view of the Bible and everything comes crashing down. And so I have to dig in and I have to destroy you to protect my own view of something that may or may not be scriptural. I'm not going to weigh in on that right now. I'll do that on a different day. But, because my own subconsciously, my own hold on my own theology is so shaky that if I'm wrong about one, I must be wrong about all of it. My whole faith collapses. And I think that learning how to embrace the beauty of being wrong is a good way to get out of that trap and that cycle of I'm just going to shout louder at you so I don't have to face the fact that I might be wrong. I'll just shout you down until you just can't argue with me anymore and we're not getting anywhere. And I'm not growing in the process because I'm not wrestling with, I might not be right about that. There's an episode about this old show, Mad About You. I just loved it. It was back in the 90s, but there's a whole episode where she just is like trying to get him to say I was wrong. And he comes up with every possible way to say he was wrong without actually saying he was wrong. He's like, I may not have been the most correct I've ever been. Or he comes up with all these crazy ways to get around flat out saying he was wrong. And, I think that we need to start with the humility of, yeah, I might not be 100% right about that, but my faith won't collapse if I'm not 100% correct.
And I don't think that our faith should have to rest on how correct we are. That's the thing. It's like if grace doesn't cover our confusions, we're all screwed anyway. So we have to start from a place where we can trust God. Like if you can't trust God, what are you doing? What do you even think it is to have faith in Christ and follow him, but you can't even believe him? Like God loves you, or he wants you to be technically correct. Those both aren't true. Either God loves you or he's obsessed with your technical correctness. I think that's a weird way of trying to judge somebody else's salvation, let alone my own, is based on some level of technical correctness on how I can articulate all the propositions related to what I think going to heaven is supposed to mean. Whatever that is, whatever I attach that to. I think that what this is doing is, and in all sarcasm, I've said this 1,000 times, but then there's the time when you look at it in the face and go, yeah, that there's a reason why that came about. Like the Trinity is not God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Bible. Right. And some people have gotten to a place where I think that's what they're doing. And they've completely forgotten about the fact that the entire reason you're at church, the entire reason you're studying your scripture, the entire reason you're praying, the entire reason you've been sent out, the entire reason you aren't simply taken away upon your moment of conversion and God leaves you here for any length of time. The only reason is because he has a intent for you to be his hands and feet in the earth, his likeness, his image. There's a purpose. There's a vocation for you to fill. There's a hole just your size for you to fill, that God has good works that he has ordained beforehand, that you should walk in them. There's reason for you. Like, that's why you should trust God. There's reason for you to be here. And notice that our mission statement in Peter is not be ready to give an answer why I'm right and you're not. It should be to give a reason for hope. And hope is something that is related to the future. And so if I can't give you a reason to have a good relationship with the future, my ability to articulate how correct I am is simply not cutting the mustard to be even called apologetics in a biblical sense.
Right. And I think that, and it makes me think about 1 Corinthians 1 and in 10 through 17. And Paul's like, you're dividing up, saying, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Peter, I follow Christ. And that's the same thing that we're doing with all of these, theological positions and our stances in every ology that you can name, dividing up that same way. And Paul is just, knock it off. And it's one of the things I love about 1 Corinthians. And we a couple of my friends at school, we joke around and call it the book of knock it off, because Paul is just saying this is not appropriate behavior, that you guys are doing all kinds of ridiculous things that's embarrassing God, starting with dividing into camps that are not biblical. You should be united in the bride of Christ. You should be united together, standing together against the spiritual warfare that we are involved in. We're not supposed to be against the people of the world. We're supposed to be fighting a bigger, more spiritual battle. And that's where we're supposed to be fighting. We're not supposed to be fighting each other. We are fighting the powers of darkness and shining a light to people who are lost in those powers of darkness. And I think we forget that. And I think, in this cage stage fighting, we are reflecting to those who are stuck in that darkness that over here isn't any better than over there. Why come over here when you're going to come and we're going to take hatchets to each other at every opportunity, and we're going to make you feel worse about yourself than you do over there in the dark? Why come over here? I really this is one of those things that gets me just really fired up, because there's no need for any of it, I don't think.
Well, and to be fair, the thing is I think a lot of the time theology kind of lends itself to being, let's say, a bravado sort of thing, where it's going to be the person who is of a certain intellectual caliber is really going to latch onto that. And most of the time, those people, let's say in general, even if they're male or female, the pride of intellect is usually the deepest sin of intellect. Right. And so theology, unfortunately, is a realm in which people that get caught up in it, often their first trap is to forget that they're a self among other selves, and they put themselves first.
Yep.
And so they fall into that constantly, and then they live through that, and then they begin to use the ideas that they're employing for that end. Right. And so it's like what we have to be reminded of is that I am not the main character of my own disjointed story. I am a important co-author in time in the story that my story is nested in. And that means your story is nested in. And if now we have that overlap, I don't care how wrong you are. You're in the story. And what role are you playing? Presently, you might even be somebody who's acting as an enemy to me. But that doesn't mean you have to be my enemy. I could be your enemy for choices of your own without me ever have to give you that relation. You're not my enemy. Right. And so I think if we can start to target that more clearly, that would be the thing that I think brings back discernment ministries, is to recognize that the thing you're combating is ideas, and ideas exist on a spiritual plane. They are not physical things. So if you're having a battle of ideas and you're using spiritual warfare against people, you're doing it wrong. Period. And you should stop it. You should stop doing apologetics altogether if that's what you're doing, until you can come back from this and recognize that the person that you're talking to is actually the mission field, not the idea. The idea is not the mission field. The person is the mission field. The idea is the thing you're in combat with, not the person. And until we can separate those things and give our hearts to persons and have that thick skin with a tender heart, those two things have to come together, because the Christian can't be rubber and their glue. Whatever you give to me bounces off to me and sticks to you. That schoolyard crap won't work in apologetics, not real world apologetics. Maybe in the YouTube comment section with the cynical atheist you met last week, that might be real gratifying. Or in the weird Discord server, or your favorite YouTube private group where everybody is just bickery and kind of like that, but you do it as a sense of regard, right? Because men have a tendency of doing this on a construction site. If somebody's not making fun of you, it's because they actually don't like you. Right. And so like in the real world, this comes about, but again, it comes about over time, building that regard and respect toward one another that is not earned on the internet in the same way. And people just assert themselves. Dissecting never builds a relationship with the living. Exactly. Yes. Because you start cutting something apart as though it were a cadaver, and then you try to put it back together. So I think this blasphemous nonsense called social construction should just die its ugly death, because it's really, that's what it's doing to people down to the identity level now. And it's trying to take the marginalized and the abnormal and the thing that doesn't really fit and like tout it as some sort of moral virtue. Right. And it's pitting people against each other in a way that even theology has not. Right. But that's on a completely different scale. But the fact that those worldly methods, like you pointed out early, those worldly methods are infiltrating the church, and we should not be a mirror that reflects the likeness of the world. That is not our job.
Yep. And, and another kind of caveat in that as well, because I have run into a lot when I started to a journey to read. I don't know. I called it spring cleaning my theology, because there was just a lot of stuff that I had been taught growing up in the Church of Christ Christian church world that was not aligning with what I was reading in my Bible. And I'm like, something's off. Either my ability to read is off, or what I've been taught is off, or something's not working out here. And I started this process of trying to figure out how to get back to looking at scripture for what scripture was trying to say. And I wandered through this very weird, vicarious path of trying to find someone who was giving better methodology to help me better understand the story of scripture. And I wound up in the soteriology realm, because someone who is of a 5-point Calvinist, in a conversation that we were having about amongst a group of women about the emotional impact and weight that miscarriages have on you for the rest of your life, had to interject something about hoping that those children were elect, and the implications that if they were not. And I had never heard that before, because Christian church tends to lean Arminian, and so that was a new idea. And trying to figure that comment out led me into the soteriology world. And I did find a lot of in trying to understand all of the arguments that were happening, did get a lot of clarity on a lot of things like grace and faith and a lot of those kinds of topics, and getting better definitions for myself, most of which I disagree with most of what I heard. So that was that. But in those spaces, and I found in those spaces, like you were talking about with the construction zone analogy and some of those things, it took me longer to get any traction for anyone to pay any attention to anything I said or any of the questions that I asked. And at the end of the day, I had to work twice as hard, twice as long to earn any kind of credibility because mainly I'm female. And as much as people want to try to push back on that, especially in those spaces, I would definitely have some words for them and a dare for them to try to prove me wrong. And so if anybody who who is up for it, we'll talk and we'll see what your experience is after that. But and it shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't have to be in a place where I have to try twice as hard to be heard, and that anyone in a conversation who is honestly seeking truth, who is honestly seeking, trying to find out how to engage with the Bible and to engage with God, that to be put down and ignored for any reason is just, to me, despicable. And so I have a lot of pushback for a lot of these, these discernment ministries just really love to throw each other under the bus. And it's who is the next guy? I'm not going to comment on the situations that got these gentlemen in these situations in the first place. All I want to say is that I am absolutely disgusted with what's been happening with the coverage of Steve Lawson and now that IBF preacher, Steve Vanderson, I think, because he was involuntarily committed a few days ago. And the cackling glee of people over their downfall absolutely just makes me just revulsed. It is repulsive what is going on. And I really wanted to post a response because, it is so cannibalistic that it is just, it doesn't belong in the church at all. We should be grieving for these families. We should be grieving for these churches that have been harmed in this process. And these guys just need to go away. We need to stop celebrating the downfall of a brother.
Yeah.
And stop, we don't need 500 responses to Steve Lawson's last sermon. We just don't. And so, I'm saying, enough is enough. Let's talk about, where do we go from here? How do we prevent this from happening? Where do we need to look in our conversations so that we are catching when, I can start to notice when, if Josh, you start to sound off, that some of us around you can go, hey, Josh, you don't sound like yourself. What's going on? What's happening in your life? Bring some things maybe to your attention and try to help prevent you from crashing and burning your life instead of throwing you in the woodchucker to help that process go even faster. And I really think we need to reorient all of these conversations to how do we prevent this instead of how do we, just stop throwing each other in the woodchucker, because it's ridiculous and it's repulsive. Sorry, I get worked up on this topic. It just
Yeah, I understand. To be honest with you, I usually don't follow too much of the static surrounding other people's controversies. So I can't speak into very much detail about any of the responses that people have done, though I am aware of the fact that there are plenty of responses. I have yet to indulge in any of them, so I'm not familiar with how far they've gone with them. But if they're anything like the normal onslaught of things that are being handled that way, like let's say the Ravi Zacharias controversy that happened a couple of years ago, in the same fashion, only that one happened after he was passed. And it was handled very terribly, and people's attitudes were a reflection. And again, as Christ said, out of the heart, out of the excess of the heart overflowing, that's where this kind of speech comes from, is a heart that wants to rejoice, not in truth necessarily, but in shame, which is not, that's why I think it hits your heart that way, is because somebody else's shame it should be sacred. There are times when shame is necessary, and that person will experience shame, but not from you, the stranger, doing it for your kicks and for the LOL from your friend and for you to high five your, little group into the sunset or whatever. That is very callous, and it's very ugly, and it shows a heart that is not, again, not a concern. This is a heart that is not taking any, let's say, any level of seriousness to the actuality of the situation, that when somebody falls into that, whether they're a believer or not, should be bad enough. But the fact that it's somebody who is actually claiming to be the leader of a flock, and that person falls into a publicly announced and like mocked and ridiculed sin, your first reaction should be mourning.
Right.
If you know what that means, if you know what happened for this person and for their family and for their relationship with their family and for their family's relationship to the congregation, and then for the congregation and their relationship to their friends, and especially if it's a very publicized congregation like the one that he led, there are going to be people that know about his church and know where he was from, and the people that are in that place are going to now have the residue of someone else's reputation on them and their testimony because of what's going on. The ripple effect of something that happens like that should be a warning to the people who are reacting to it, but it should also be a warning to anybody who becomes serious about theology and apologetics, that James says not many of you should be teachers. Why? Because they will be judged more harshly. And I don't think that just begins with heaven, because people will judge us harshly. People will. And it's not just the unbeliever. It's obviously the believer too is going to judge pretty harshly. Right. And so with that in mind, knowing that our expectations of one another should elevate because we've been called to something better. And we should be able to say, guys, that reaction is like indefensively not Christ-like, and you shouldn't do that. I know that people like to point to ideas like, mocking the priests of Baal and this whole thing, or that, sometimes Paul will use a manner of sarcasm to talk about things. These are people who are in a position of authority, literally, that you are not. And it would be weird of you to try to back your own tendency to want to be like that, as though those examples were the norm. Those examples are not the norm. And if it's normal to you to model your life after the extremes, you're going to have problems no matter what you attach it to. But if what you're attaching it to is the parts of the Bible that make you laugh when people are like, oh yeah, well, he mocked the priests of Baal, maybe your God is in the bathroom. Yeah, that's funny. It is funny, but in a really ironic sense. And to us, we're so disconnected from the context. It's funny in a really inappropriate sense sometimes.
Right.
And I think that that's where that's coming from, is a heart that's become cynical and kind of, let's say, scarred or mutilated toward being concerned with the other. Or perhaps it's, let's say, due at least in part to a personality type difference, to be fair. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a big missing component is the Holy Spirit, because I think that Holy Spirit, who continues to give us life and give us that new heart and to bring oxygen into those conversations, it is so important. And I kind of want to really turn, because I don't want to stay in this negative space anymore. That's kind of not my jam. I don't like being here. It feels icky to me. So I want to kind of turn back around, and let's get into the positive. And I want to go to John 17, because that's where I just live in this conversation. This prayer of Jesus just lives in my mind. And as we're looking at John 17, hang on, I'm going to pull it up because I am terrible at remembering things. So, so I'm looking at the very end, that when he's praying for the believers that are yet to come, the ones who have not yet believed, those coming after him. And he talks about, now he says, I think I have New Living Translation open, so we're gonna make it some more people mad by using the NLT, but I like it for devotional reasons. I love the way they do that. This is, I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will be one, just as you and I are one, as you are in me, Father, and I am in you. May they be in us so that the world will believe you sent me. I have given them the glory you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. I am in them and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Father, I want these whom you have given to me to be with me where I am. Then they will see all the glory you gave me because you love me even before the world began. And I just love that whole idea that Jesus is comparing how believers should interact as the same way that he and the Father are interacting. Like, because Jesus and this whole idea that we are constantly should be tabernacling, to use one of my favorite Old Testament terms, tabernacling with the Trinitarian God. And so all of those, whatever word you want to use there, that Trinitarian theology, it's so easy to slip into problems really quickly there. And, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So, but in however we inhabit that in tabernacle in that space of communing and dwelling with Yahweh and the Trinitarian God, that should be reflecting in us and in our hearts. And I love that idea. And I love the idea that Jesus is praying for unity, but he's not praying for uniformity. And so I think Jesus gives us room for a variety of expressions because he's very clear there is one way to the Father, and that is Jesus. Jesus is very clear about that. But he doesn't give us such strict uniformity in the ways we get to Jesus, that it's my way or the highway. And I think that people who are my way or the highway are in error, because we should be, the way that I tabernacle with Yahweh and in that dwelling is going to be significant to my soul in a way that's different from yours, Josh. And so whichever way that you find that is that, vehicle that gets you to Jesus within the bounds of acceptable orthodoxy. And I don't mean just Eastern Orthodoxy. I mean just, within the bounds of what's allowed in Scripture, that I think we need to have some grace for each other because, my Christian Church of Christ brothers are not fans of instruments in worship, but, I am, but I can go either way because I understand that for them, that's significant and meaningful in a way that they are worshiping Yahweh. And so, I think there needs to be diversity in so much as people connect differently. Our personalities are different. The things that speak to our souls, the way that God speaks to us is different, and we need those different expressions. But we also need to be honoring of that fact that what speaks to me and the way God speaks to me is not the same as the way God might speak to you. And starting there and building on that positive acknowledgement, I think might be a good place to start.
Well, I think there's a lot of good. Oops, my
You lost your camera again?
yeah, my camera. I don't know what's going on with that. I think there's a lot of positive to what you're talking about and trying to find a way where we can meet at level ground at first, at least. The main thing about it too is that it's not necessarily like every time we come against something that's different about one another, it means that it's either right or wrong. because there is that kind of subjectivity and difference between our experiences, right?
Mhm.
The thing that I want to make sure that we don't like neglect about the situation is that when I
Mhm.
go to church, I'm not going to church because of me,
Right.
right? So that should be also part of the equation when we're addressing this, because I don't want anybody to try to straw man the situation and be like,
Right.
well, you're just trying to make church whatever you want it to be so that you're
Mm.
comfortable.
Yeah.
No, church isn't about me. Being a
Right.
Christian isn't something that I do.
Right.
Christianity is something that we do
Right.
together. That's part
Right.
of what Christianity, if we want to use that word at all, being a body by Paul's
Mhm.
definition means that there will be
Right.
a multiplicity of parts that come
Right.
together to assemble the body. So it's the
Right.
we that makes the body. That's
Right.
what we need. First and foremost is that we need to get in our heads that the we is where the body happens. And the way that our place is taken in the body is going to naturally have that
Mhm.
diversity, just the same way that all of these parts on my face aren't
Mhm.
made of fingers. Only the hands are made of fingers.
Right.
Not everything is going to be the same piece, but that doesn't
Right.
mean that it won't find its place in the full thing, the fullness of the expression, let's say.
Right.
So when
And I
Christ is
think
talking, oh yeah, go ahead, go
oh, go ahead. But I think my point is maybe better because I like terrible analogies because analogies always break down eventually, but
ahead.
they always do. But especially it's even funnier of what I'm about to say. So I think about this whole idea of unity but not uniformity, like a car lot. So there's only so many ways you can build a car, and it's still a car, right? But there's options that are available. So I can pick from, I can pick an SUV, I can pick a pickup, I can pick a sedan. So there are limit. You can't put two of the wheels on the bottom and two of the wheels on the top and have it still function like a car. So it's not it's not, Burger King. You can have it your own way. There are
Right.
limits to things that still make a car a car. So that's kind of the way that I envisioned in my head. Like there is, we're not selling
Yes.
cars and you can't drive a boat down the road. You can't. There's limits to what that analogy can do there, which is what my idea and my thinking is. We got to stay on the car lot where there's some options, but you can't redesign a car and turn it inside out and put the seats on the bottom and still be able to drive it with the wheels and the steering wheel and the back trunk. And I mean,
Right.
just there's only so many ways you can make that work. So that's kind of where my brain is going in that way with that terrible analogy. Terrible analogy there.
No, I don't think it's a terrible analogy. I think
Mhm.
I think you're touching on another point that's really crucial, is to recognize that again, it's made of many parts, and the
Mhm.
parts themselves individually are never going to be enough to be the whole thing altogether. They're going to need each other, but that doesn't mean that all of the parts are uniform in the same way. It means that they function holistically. So
Yep.
what I mean by that is like, okay, like you said, that you can take a car and only to a certain degree can you have the format of the car still participate in the identity car, right?
Right.
In the same way, you have a body, somebody can have a body. If I cut off my hand, I still have a body. I just have a body that's missing a part that it would otherwise have better function for, right? And so it's not like a church that's missing some pieces of itself isn't a church. It's a church that would be functioning better if all of its pieces were participating in the same sense, right? What sucks is that even in the best of churches that you have, 10% of the people do all of the work, right? That's just kind of how these things work. And it works that way in most everything. That principle is actually called the Pareto distribution principle, where you have this exacted thing that happens on repeat throughout most of creation, is that you'll have most
Mhm.
everything stack up at the bottom, and then there's going to be few
Mhm.
at the top that just do more than everything else, right? The same is true of artists, of musicians, of anything,
Mhm.
right? So the people in the room are going to have the same type of distribution. We can accept that about one another, while still trying to encourage one another to participate all the more. Because again,
Right.
it's not like, okay, it's not like I always use both of my thumbs. They're
Mhm.
not nearly as crucial to my survival and my performance as my heart or my lungs are. They are always in operation, but that doesn't mean that I can function just fine without both of my thumbs in the same way that I would if I had both my
Right.
thumbs. They
Right.
serve their purpose, and when you need them, you need them. Just because they don't perform in the same way as the heart and the lungs do doesn't mean that you don't need them. And most people are in a place where they think that if they're not part of the worship team, if they're not the pastor, if they're not the
Mhm.
person that's supposed to lead the children's study, if they're just a congregant who loves the Lord and shows up every week and tries to bring Jesus with them wherever they are because they're being fed and they're submitting to spiritual headship, you are needed. Just because you're not part of one of those main central organs doesn't mean you aren't needed, right?
Right.
And people, I think, get it in their head that they need to participate in that way in order to be part of the body, or in order to be recognizably one of the people of God, like a man of God, so to speak, right? And it's I think because we've gotten to a place also where there's this expectation of mediocrity, where you don't really have to like devote yourself entirely to the Lord. There's always these, cobwebs in the corners, and so to speak. And then people become complacent about that. And they think when they encounter somebody who is really passionate about the Lord and really pursuing God and praying, and
Mhm.
like their life is transforming, they look at that person and they go, oh wow, you must have a calling on your life, you should be a pastor, or you should do this, or you should be in this position. Like it's as though the position was the thing God was calling you for, rather than all of the things they're actually just doing, right?
Right.
If I said I met somebody who loved God, loved people, couldn't stop like being like the Lord as much as they wanted to be like the Lord, and if they stopped, it would bother them personally and physically. That they were somebody who loved their wife, who loved their children, who did a good job at their work, right?
Yep.
Like they were just outstanding, and they actually went out of their way to sacrifice of their own good to make sure other people didn't go without. What would you call that person? It's like, you don't call them a priest, you don't have to call them a
Mhm.
minister, you don't have to call them a pastor. What you should call them is a Christian.
Right.
And we should
Right.
all just have that. We should all be able to build an expectation of ourselves first, before one another, but also of one another, to hold each other to that standard, so that we
Mhm.
don't have to look and say that person who fills that mold of excellence, they have to be the pastor because there's something separate from my category.
Right.
As if you can't serve right where you are. And
Mhm.
neglecting to do so because you feel disqualified is not a reason not to do so.
Right. I think, this takes me back thinking about the Old Testament, and one of the many, many, many lessons that we learn from watching the nation of Israel is that um, we, as people, tend to be kingmakers. And so we fall in love with this idea of being the top of the heap, of making kings out of each other, of idolatry, of worshiping the position, worshiping the person in the position. And that, that can get us into all kinds of trouble. And that, is another one of those things that First Corinthians 1 is Paul is pushing back on. It's not the idolatry, that's not the worship of Paul, it's not the worship of Apollos, it's not the worship of Cephas. It is the worship of God. Jesus should be forever and permanently on that seat, and we should not be putting things on that seat that belongs only to God alone. And but we tend to, because I think shame ties deeply into idolatry, um, and so I think that there's that need of that shame response, that somehow that king making provides us with our own very, very poor covering of the shame that only God can truly heal. And we need to have some more conversations about about shame and its role in idolatry and its role in hiding, and how king making is another way of hiding. I think they hid behind the idolatry of the other nations, because the idea of being in relationship with Yahweh was shameful to Israel in some way, that they needed that king, as a covering between them and Yahweh. And it's an idea that still, I just did a project for my OT biblical theology class looking at shame in the prophets and in Genesis. And so it's still a thing that's percolating in my brain, all the implications of that. And I'm just trying to think through how massively that is. And then next I get to pile on Isaiah's definition of salvation, which I'm already a little wide-eyed at, holy moly, about that. So putting all of that together at the end is going to be, I think, pretty cool. And I think it leads in, ties into all of this conversation of, we shouldn't try to hide and cover our own shame and frailty in combat with fellow believers. That's the last thing that we should be doing. We should be embracing each other instead of running around each other with hatchets, seeing how many pieces we can hack off. I really want us to get back to starting in places of conversations of good. Where do we agree? Where do we foundationally agree with each other? My conversations with Tyler and Jacobs and Ernie were really eye-opening. It's like there's so much more that we agree on, that are all places that we can sit and celebrate together, that we don't have to be fighting over. That, let's take a breath, hit pause on the fighting, and let's spend some time agreeing and healing for a little while before we go back into conversations where we disagree. Because I think when I agree with you and I heal the relationship, we can disagree better if we come at it from a place of healing and respect and reconciliation. And just continuing to chop each other to pieces isn't going to get us anywhere, except even more divided and entrenched than we currently see right now. So that's kind of my thoughts there.
Right on. Yeah, I think there's a good lesson to be learned about how to carry forward in the future. If we start to regard how things have gone, we can kind of see it. Most people who are in the situation where they're being talked to in the way that we're describing, let's say, the person who's on the receiving end of the heresy hunting can usually see it's evil, right?
Yeah.
The person doing the heresy hunting usually can't see their evil, right? And so what's really odd about that, and not to get too weird about it, but you have the same pattern appearing in the psychological world with the person who we would say has narcissistic tendencies, can't see evil in the mirror. This is a pattern that repeats itself also in the narrative world with vampires who can't see themselves in a mirror, and they feed on that pain and that life from other people that they're taking, right? So in the same way that we shouldn't consume lifeblood tangibly, I think we shouldn't do it spiritually either. And so one of the things my pastor says that I think is really cool, and you can kind of take it with you, the way you know when there's a wolf in the flock is by looking at the sheep, because sheep don't eat other sheep.
Right.
Like, you should be able to recognize when these things are taking place and not participate in or with them. Right. And don't ignore them. Don't ignore when it happens. Even in your own heart, don't ignore it, because it's not like any of us is above this. Right. Like in our own hearts, we need to acknowledge and recognize that we're in that place also, that my garden is just as full of snakes as yours. But I'm not going to participate in the extra. And when I know it's there, especially, I'm not going to participate in the extra when I know it's there.
And I think that, again, taking a breath, hitting the pause button, and sitting down, if you can't sit down in person, at least sitting down camera on to camera on and having some conversation instead of debate.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people get a lot of benefit from debate. I personally am not a fan. I would much rather sit down like this and have a conversation with you rather than, because I think at debate we get into this structured canned responses a lot, and it is. I just I have not seen a debate yet where my mind has been changed, but conversation for me is where change happens, because I try to see. I guess it's my superpower of optimism. I guess that that there is, like my grandpa used to say all the time, there is gold and goodness in everyone. Sometimes you just have to dig a little harder and a little deeper to find it. And so, when I can sit down with you and we can thoughtfully and, prayerfully in the spirit try to define difficult terminology, try to hear each other out, and try to get beyond the words of what you're saying to the heart of what you're saying. And then I can understand your heart, and I can see how much that you are in love with God, and that you and I aren't that far apart because we both love God. That is going to be a good place, because if I see your heart, it's harder for me to act hatefully towards you. When I see you, I see the image of God reflected in you. And so I do have a lot of hope that things can be healed and turned into a much better direction. But it's going to take a lot more people standing up and not clicking on those YouTube videos that are doing those kinds of things, and passing and leaving comments like things about, can we have some positive conversations? Let's talk about how do we prevent these problems instead of celebrating the fact that they happened. Like, it's going to take a lot more people just saying, we don't want to watch this kind of thing anymore. We don't want to participate in these kinds of conversations anymore. We want to reframe them to be God honoring. And but I do think there's a lot of hope and possibility to move in a good direction.
And I think it's more useful for people also if they approach a lot of these situations you use the vast amount of wealth of information that's already accessible at your fingertips, and become a person who's willing to learn. Like, there's no real excuse any longer. You should learn until you're at your capacity. Right? Like, that's where you should learn. And what I don't mean is you should learn until you feel confident enough that you don't think you need to ask any more questions. When you get to that point, you need to learn way more. If you ever get to the point where you're just like satisfied where you are and you don't have any more questions, you've gotten a little lost. There are questions, my friend. There are questions. The Lord is a well that you will never get to the bottom of. I promise. And so there's enough for you. If you've gotten caught up on one subject that's taken your mind's eye for the last, let's say, year, 2 years, 3 years, and still in that time, you found no joy in the expectation that God is going to pull fruit from what you're doing with him, then maybe you should refocus. Maybe you should recalibrate. Maybe you should kind of, take stock of what it is that you're doing with your time and your attention and your trust and your motives. You should be in a place where you're trying to be well integrated. You're trying to be an authentic kind of person, right? And if you're saying things that make you feel and act weak, then you should probably not be doing those things.
I think we
start
all
on the ground floor.
Yeah, I think we all need to get out, touch some grass, play with some kids, and reconnect with that wide-eyed wonder and curiosity, because that's my other superpower, is my voracious curiosity. And so I get so curious about what you're saying that I forget to be mad that I don't like what you're saying, because then I'm like, well, why are you saying that? What is behind what you're saying? And I get so curious that I forget, oh, I don't like that. Like what would make you want to say, where are you coming from? What do you mean by that? Explain that terminology. Let me find out why you're saying what you're saying, because sometimes, words are hard and emotions can't be put into words, and faith is very difficult to express. And so maybe you are just using human language to express the unexpressible, and doing so in a way that is not exactly what you want to say, but it's the words that you have. So we definitely need to, I think, shed some of our cynicism and our hardness, spend some more time around young children, and get some of their infectious wonder and curiosity, because that, I think, is another death blow to some of this cage stageness, is if I'm more curious instead of entrenching in my position. So, go hang out with some toddlers and some preschoolers. They'll teach you, they'll teach you a few things about being wide-eyed and wondering, and stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that. So I want to kind of just wrap up here with some final thoughts, because we've been going for about an hour and a half, and that's getting to the end of my ability to keep a train of thought going for this long. So let's so Josh, kind of give us your final like thought or two on this topic, and then I'll give mine, and then we'll kind of land the plane here.
Okay, well, if I were to try to sum up in any useful way, I'd say if there was any revelation that came out the history of the Western world, it was that the individual is really, really important. And so I think that if we were to take seriously what Christ said when he said to treat others how you want to be treated, and I think we asked ourselves with all honesty how we would answer that question, how do I want to be treated? The way I've come to answer this question is, I want to be treated like I've never happened before, and like I'll never happen again. That I happened by God's direct intervention. And what we call that is a miracle, right? Something that doesn't happen ever again, and happened because God intervened. I want to be treated that way. So if that's how I want to be treated, therefore, that's how I ought to treat you. I should treat you like you're a miracle, like you've never happened before, like you'll never happen again, and that you came about by God's direct intervention. Right. And if we started there, and I think what we could do is extend to the other person at least the courtesy of being taken seriously. Right. And that I think are two really solid starting places for any conversation with anybody about any subject. You should be able to start in those two places. Right. The other thing that I would say as a really quick close up is diversity is something that I think is let's say a buzzword that is overused in the world. I think that in some sense, having a diversity gives a bigger range of opportunity to operate within. And that's one of the good things about diversity. However, diversity is temporary and localized, or else it is death, because something that is diversified too far simply decomposes. It needs to have something that maintains the life within it, that keeps it a body, to maintain the same analogy that I've been using so far. Is the body is unified by the spirit, the soul, the operative thing that is inside it. And that is what we need to rely on God and the spirit for, is being the thing, the operative principle, the unifying and animating principle that brings together all of the different pieces that the body is made of, brings them together and puts them into a proper operation. That is God's job. That is God's job. And our job is to show up and to love God and to love man and to do well, so that we can hear one day, well done, good and faithful servant. Right? You're not going to hear that on accident. What you need to do is dig in and pursue the Lord. And you'll do that by loving his imagers. That's how you'll best do it. That's why the two greatest commandments are what they are. And Christ said they're like one another. Of course they are.
Right. And I would end just with the fact that, I love that the only person that we see that gives a name to God is Hagar. And she gives him the name, the God who sees me. And I think if the God is a God who sees me, that as an image bearer of God, I should work hard to see you. And so that we need to reflect that part as the image of God, to see each other as image bearers, as fellow human beings, as souls precious to God, that Jesus paid a very dear price, that loved all of us so much, that the God of has gone to unbelievable lengths to pursue us and loves us, and for us to not reflect that, I think does a disservice. So I'll just kind of leave it there with Hagar and the God who sees me, and I should see you because God sees me. So Cosmic Corner, Josh, what have you got coming up over there on Cosmic Corner and Faith Unaltered?
Well, this coming Friday, what I have coming up is me and the Cosmic Crew are going to be discussing at least the first Inside Out movie to discuss, let's say, which parts of it are clever animated pseudoscience and which parts are actual really useful principles and visuals for things that, like we said earlier, are just very difficult to express in mere words. And there's a phrase that says a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so a moving picture could be worth loads. And so what we want to do is kind of pick apart at the movie and some of the ideas in the movie. Spoiler alert, we'll be talking about the movie. But if you've seen that movie and you enjoyed it, as most everybody else did, and you find it easy to identify with, and that is of interest to you, we're going to be diving into that. And I'm going to be talking with my friend Spencer, who is, in fact, a counselor who specializes in helping people who have gone through spiritual traumas and psychological traumas. And so he's an invaluable member of the crew that I'm working with over there. And I can't wait to talk about that. It's going to be a blast.
Right. I'm looking forward to that. I will be modding that one, that conversation. So that'll be a lot of fun. And I've got some really good stuff. Nick, Quint, and I are cooking up a couple of things. And I am got a couple of Old Testament things that I really want to do and put out. I want to talk about shame in Genesis and the prophets, and a couple other things that I've got. And I'm considering throwing together, not throwing together, but I've been really inspired as I've been looking at spending so much time in the prophets lately, this idea of the someone who is coming that is presented in the Old Testament, that is Jesus. But just looking at that, and I've had O come Emmanuel and come thou long expected Jesus in my head so long. So that's just this kind of idea I'm thinking about putting together some stuff for coming up for Advent. That's fast approaching, faster than we want to think it is. So we've got some fun stuff coming up here, I think, as well. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I am definitely looking forward to, maybe having you back and talking about some more things and some more positive conversations about whatever, kind of that where we cross paths and strike chords on some good things. So I'm looking forward to more conversations. And yeah, after we're wrapping up here. So everybody go over and take a look at Nick's video, addressing some of his thoughts and concerns about what's happening in the American Baptist Convention and some things going on there. I think Nick is trying to do the same thing, to start some positive conversations, to move things in a good direction. And I think that everybody go check that out, because I think that's really good. I saw Jamie here. Everybody go check out my friend Jamie's channel. I love Jamie to death. He is a great friend. So go see go check out his channel. And everybody, thank you for coming. I know this was long, and I know that we've got still some people watching. So thank you so much all for tuning in. And Sean, you're not going to escape forever. I'm going to get you under my channel here one of these days. So one of these days you're gonna come on my channel, and we're gonna talk about some stuff. That'll be fun. And Troy, wherever he went, he's not gonna get away from me forever either. gonna get them both. So thank you all. Thank you so much for coming. God bless, and don't forget, as we are constantly, where my channeling comes from, the deep in us that's longing for God, looking for that connection, calls to the deep in others, that we every day journey to tabernacle, to dwell with God. And so that really is the heart here and what we want to do. So everyone, have a blessed week. Don't forget to tabernacle with Yahweh as you're working towards journeying every day in deeper faith and dwelling with him. So go all and be blessed. And thank you so much.